What if everything you thought you knew about the most powerful couple in America was just the surface, and beneath it lies $1 billion secret they are desperately trying to keep hidden? A secret so explosive that it involves one of the most notorious criminals in modern history, Jeffrey Epstein. And now that secret is threatening to tear apart the carefully constructed image of the first family, because something absolutely shocking just happened that nobody saw coming, and it involves Melania Trump, legal threats, missing photos, and a fight that could change everything we know about power, corruption, and the truth that some people will do anything to bury. Let me explain what is really going on here, and trust me, by the end of this, you are going to see this entire situation in a completely different light. So here is what happened, and this is where things get really interesting. The Department of Justice recently released thousands of pages of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender who died in jail back in 2019. And these files were supposed to give the American public answers about how this monster operated for so many years, who knew what, and who helped him avoid serious charges for decades. But instead of getting clarity, we got something far more disturbing. We got a cover-up happening in real time right before our eyes. Among the thousands of photos released were images showing some of the most powerful people in the world connected to Epstein, politicians, celebrities, business leaders, all captured in photographs that were seized from his homes in New York and the Virgin Islands. And one of those photos showed something particularly interesting. It showed President Donald Trump standing with Melania Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, who is now in prison for helping him traffic young girls. And this photo was not new. People had seen versions of it before, but what happened next is what makes this story absolutely explosive. Within hours of the Justice Department posting these files online, something strange started happening. At least 16 files suddenly disappeared from the government website, just gone, vanished without explanation. And one of those missing files was the photo showing Trump and Melania with Epstein and Maxwell. Now, you might be thinking, okay, maybe it was a technical glitch. Maybe there was a good reason. But here is the problem. The Department of Justice did not tell anyone they were removing these files. They just quietly took them down. And when people started noticing and asking questions, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee called it out publicly, asking what else was being covered up and demanding transparency because this was not supposed to happen. Congress had passed a law signed by Trump himself requiring all Epstein files to be released to the public, no exceptions, no delays, and yet here we are watching evidence disappear in real time. The Justice Department eventually came up with an explanation. They said they removed the photo because they were concerned it might show victims of Epstein's crimes. So out of an abundance of caution, they pulled it down for review. But here is where that explanation falls apart. After they reviewed it, they admitted there were no victims in the photo at all. It was just Trump, Melania, Epstein, and Maxwell at what appears to be a social event, so they put it back online, but the damage was done because now everyone is asking the obvious question. If there were no victims in the photo and it was just a picture of powerful people at a party, why did it really get taken down? And why did it take public outrage to get it restored? Now, let me be clear about something. Donald Trump has admitted he knew Epstein. They were friends back in the day. They went to parties together. They moved in the same social circles in New York and Florida. Trump has said they had a falling out in the mid-2000s. But the problem is that these files keep showing more connections than Trump wants people to know about. And this is where Melania comes into the story in a way that nobody expected. Enter Michael Wolff, the journalist who wrote Fire and Fury, that explosive book about Trump's first term in office that caused absolute chaos when it came out. Wolff has written multiple books about Trump, and he has been researching the Epstein connection for years. And recently, he started making public statements about what he discovered, specifically about Melania Trump and her connection to Jeffrey Epstein. According to Wolff, He conducted extensive interviews with Epstein before his death, hours and hours of recorded conversations, and Epstein apparently told him things about Melania, about how she and Trump met, about the social circle they were all part of in the 1990s, and Wolf has been saying publicly that Melania was very involved in Epstein's social world, that this is where she actually met Donald Trump, and that there are details about their early relationship that the Trumps desperately do not want to come out. So what did Melania do when Wolf started talking about this? She went nuclear. Her lawyers sent Wolf a letter threatening to sue him for $1 billion. Yes, you heard that right. $1 billion unless he immediately retracted his statements, apologized publicly, and paid her damages for what they claim is defamation, and they gave him a deadline to comply or face the lawsuit. But here is where this gets really interesting and where Melania's plan completely backfired. Instead of backing down and being intimidated by this massive threat, Michael Wolff did something brilliant. He sued her first. He filed a lawsuit in New York under special laws designed to protect free speech and stop powerful people from using the threat of expensive lawsuits to silence journalists and critics. And in his lawsuit, Wolff laid out exactly what he thinks is going on. He says Melania and Donald Trump have made it a practice to threaten anyone who speaks against them with these massive lawsuits, not because they actually have a case, but because they know most people cannot afford to fight $1 billion lawsuit, so people get scared and back down and stay quiet, but Wolff is not backing down. In his legal filing, Wolff explained that everything he said about Melania is either true, opinion based on facts, or taken completely out of context by her lawyers. He never said Melania committed any crimes. He never said she was involved in Epstein's trafficking operation. What he said was that she was part of Epstein's social circle, which is factually true based on photos and records, and that she met Trump through those connections, which also appears to be true. And he said she is now actively involved in managing how the White House is handling the release of these Epstein files, which, given the timing of photos being removed and restored, does not seem like an unreasonable thing to suggest. But here is what makes Wolff's lawsuit really powerful under New York law, because he sued her first using these anti-intimidation statutes. He now has the power to subpoena Melania Trump, to subpoena Donald Trump, and to question them under oath about their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And Wolff has said publicly that this is exactly what he wants to do. He wants to get both of them in front of a court reporter and ask them directly about everything, about how they met, about their friendship with Epstein, about what they knew and when they knew it, about the parties they attended, about the photos that exist, about everything that has been hidden for so long. Now, obviously, Melania is fighting back. She hired one of the biggest law firms in the world, DLA Piper, and they are trying to get the case moved from New York State court to federal court, which Wolff says is just a delay tactic to avoid having to answer questions. And Melania's team has been trying to claim they cannot even serve her with the lawsuit properly, that she does not actually live in New York, even though she owns an apartment there. They are throwing up every possible roadblock to avoid her having to sit for a deposition. And you have to ask yourself why. If she has nothing to hide, if everything Wolff said is false, why not just answer the questions under oath and clear her name? Meanwhile, back to the Epstein files themselves, the problems keep getting worse for the Trump administration. When the Justice Department finally released documents, they released only a tiny fraction of what they were supposed to. Estimates suggest they released less than 1% of the files. There are apparently 300 gigabytes of documents, communications, and evidence, and they put out maybe 2.5 gigabytes. And much of what they did release was so heavily redacted that entire pages are just black, completely blacked out. 550 pages in the initial release were fully redacted, not a single word visible, just page after page of black ink. The lawmakers who wrote the law requiring these files to be released, Representatives Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, one Democrat and one Republican, have said publicly that the Justice Department is not complying with the law. They are talking about bringing contempt charges against Attorney General Pam Bondi, who, by the way, used to be one of Trump's personal defense lawyers before he made her Attorney General, and they have suggested they might even pursue impeachment if the Justice Department continues to obstruct the release of these files. And here is something else that is really suspicious. Remember when those files temporarily disappeared from the website, including the Trump-Melania photo, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who also happens to be another one of Trump's former personal attorneys, went on television and said they pulled the photo because victim rights groups contacted them with concerns. But when reporters asked which victim rights groups and what their specific concerns were, the Justice Department would not answer. They would not name a single group or explain what the actual concern was. And then after reviewing it, they admitted there were no victims in the photo anyway. So the whole explanation makes no sense. It sounds like they were just making something up to justify removing a photo that was politically embarrassing. What makes this even more concerning is that while the Trump administration was releasing barely any documents and heavily redacting everything, they seemed very focused on making sure photos of Bill Clinton appeared prominently in the release. The initial batch had multiple photos of Clinton with Epstein, and White House officials were actively drawing attention to those photos. Meanwhile, photos of Trump were conspicuously absent, and when one did appear, it mysteriously vanished. And this is not a partisan observation. This is about transparency and accountability. Congress passed a bipartisan law. Trump signed it himself, and now his own Justice Department is not following it. And the only logical explanation is that there is something in those files that they do not want the public to see. Now, let us talk about what we actually know from the files that have been released, because there are some important details that have come out. We now know that as far back as 1996, almost a decade before Epstein's first arrest, a victim named Mariah Farmer went to the FBI and told them Epstein was involved in child sex abuse, and the FBI did nothing. They did not investigate. They did not stop him. They let him continue for another 12 years. And we know that in 2008, when Epstein finally faced federal charges, the Justice Department under President Bush made a deal that let him plead guilty to minor state prostitution charges instead of federal sex trafficking charges. He served just 13 months in a county jail where he was allowed to leave during the day for work. And the U.S. attorney who made that deal was Alexander Acosta, who Trump later made his labor secretary. We also know from emails released by the House Oversight Committee that Epstein himself wrote about Trump and said he knows how dirty Donald is. Those were Epstein's own words in his private emails. He knew things about Trump, and whatever he knew, it was significant enough that he felt comfortable writing it down. We know that according to some of the documents Wolf has referenced in his lawsuit, Trump and Epstein spent about 10 years together pursuing models, Eastern European models, catalog models, women and girls who dreamed of being models. And Melania herself was a model who came to the United States from Slovenia in the 1990s. She entered that exact world that Trump and Epstein were operating in. And according to Wolf's sources, including Epstein himself, this is how she met Trump, through these circles, through these parties, through this world that Epstein controlled. Now, obviously, Melania's lawyers say all of this is false and defamatory. They say Wolf is a liar who makes things up. And they point to the fact that the Daily Beast retracted an article about this. But here is the thing. The Daily Beast retracted the article and said it did not meet their standards, but they did not say the information was false. There is a difference. Media organizations sometimes retract stories because of how they were reported or sourced, not because the underlying facts are wrong. And Wolf is saying he has recordings, he has evidence, he has hour after hour of Epstein talking, and he is willing to present all of that evidence in court if Melania will actually show up and face him. And this brings us to the bigger question that everyone should be asking. Why is this fight happening right now? Why is Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, threatening a $1 billion lawsuit against a journalist for talking about connections to Jeffrey Epstein that are at least partially documented in photographs and public records? Why is the Justice Department, now run by Trump's former lawyer, removing photos of Trump from the Epstein files and releasing barely 1% of the documents Congress ordered them to release? Why are they fighting so hard to keep information secret if there is nothing to hide? The simplest explanation, the one that makes the most sense given everything we are seeing, is that there is something in those files, something in that full story about Trump and Epstein and Melania and that whole world they operated in during the 90s and 2000s. There is something there that is so damaging, so explosive, that they are willing to threaten billion-dollar lawsuits, willing to defy Congress, willing to risk contempt charges and impeachment proceedings, willing to do whatever it takes to keep it buried. And here is what makes this particularly important right now. Trump is back in the White House. He has surrounded himself with people who used to be his personal lawyers. Pam Bondi is now Attorney General. Todd Blanche is Deputy Attorney General. These are people whose job was to protect Trump. And now they are in charge of deciding what information the public gets to see about Trump's connection to one of the most notorious criminals in modern history. You do not have to be a conspiracy theorist to see a problem with that. That is just an obvious conflict of interest. Michael Wolff has said he wants to use his lawsuit to get answers, to put Trump and Melania under oath and ask them everything about how they met, about their relationship with Epstein, about what they knew about his crimes, about why photos are being hidden and files are being suppressed. And Wolff has been pretty clear that he thinks there is a much bigger story here than what has come out so far. And given what we have seen, given the lengths they are going to fight this, he is probably right. The fundraising campaign that Wolff started to fight Melania's threatened lawsuit raised over $750,000 from more than 15,000 people, which tells you that a lot of Americans want these answers. They want to know the truth. They are tired of powerful people using money and lawyers and threats to hide things that the public has a right to know, especially when those powerful people are running the country. And this is not even getting into all the other people in the Epstein files. The photos that have been released show Mick Jagger, Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, Bill Clinton, Pope John Paul II, all in various photos with Epstein, some at parties, some in his homes. And the question is not whether famous people took photos with Epstein. Obviously, many did. He was wealthy and well-connected. The question is who knew what was going on, who participated, who helped him avoid justice for so long, and why the full truth is still being hidden decades later. There are 1,300 victims that the Justice Department has identified. 1,300 people whose lives were destroyed by Epstein and his network, and they deserve answers. They deserve to know who enabled this monster, who protected him, who looked the other way, and they deserve justice. And we are not going to get that if the people in charge of releasing this information are the same people who have the most to lose from it coming out. So where does this leave us? Melania Trump is fighting to avoid being questioned under oath about her connection to Jeffrey Epstein. The Justice Department, run by Trump's former lawyers, is refusing to release the full Epstein files despite a law requiring them to do so. Photos of Trump and Melania with Epstein keep mysteriously disappearing and then reappearing after public backlash. And a journalist who says he has hours of recorded interviews with Epstein talking about the Trumps is being threatened with $1 billion lawsuit to make him stay quiet. You do not have to pick a political side to see that something is very wrong here. You do not have to love Trump or hate Trump to recognize that the public deserves transparency, especially about someone like Jeffrey Epstein, who hurt so many people and operated for so long with apparent protection from powerful figures. This should not be a partisan issue. This should be about accountability and truth. And right now, we are not getting either. The fight between Michael Wolff and Melania Trump is just beginning. The fight over the Epstein files is far from over. And as more information comes out, as more people start asking questions, as the courts get involved and lawmakers push for answers, we are going to learn more about what has been hidden and why. But one thing is already clear. When people fight this hard to keep secrets buried, when they threaten billion-dollar lawsuits and remove evidence and defy Congress, it is usually because those secrets are worth hiding, and the truth, when it finally comes out, is going to be devastating. This is not just about one photo or one lawsuit or one set of documents. This is about power, about corruption, about how the rich and famous protect each other, about how justice can be bought and sold, about how the truth can be buried if you have enough money and enough lawyers and enough friends in high places. And it is about whether we as a society are going to demand accountability or whether we are going to let powerful people continue to operate above the law. law. So pay attention to this story. Share it with people who need to know, because this is not going away. Wolf is not backing down. The victims are not going to stop demanding justice. And the truth has a way of coming out eventually, no matter how much money someone spends trying to hide it. And when it does, it is going to shake everything. If you found this important, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what happens next in this story, because trust me, this is just the beginning and you are going to want to know how this ends.